let me welcome you. I'm Bruce Shapiro. I'm Executive Director of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. I want to welcome you on behalf of the DART Center and the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism to this really exciting and important workshop on covering suicide. First of all, I want to invite any of you who are seated, especially if there are any of you who are journalists seated at the periphery, to come to the table. Journalists first, and then if there are empty seats, anyone else who wants to come, do so. This is a conversation, and being at the table, I think, will really matter. We have a tight schedule, a jammed schedule, which you can see. So I'm going to make a few welcoming remarks, introduce a few people, give a sense of the shape of the next couple of days, and then we're going to leap right into it. First of all, I want to start by thanking all of you for being here, giving up 2 days for this really challenging subject for us as journalists. I want to thank the scholars and experts and researchers who are here, and in particular, I want to thank the 2 funders who have supported this workshop. First of all, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, you'll hear from Bob Gebbia from AFSP in a few minutes, has been very generous in supporting a program that's never been done anywhere in the United States before. This is a pilot program, both in terms of what's going to work and in terms of producing some materials and outcomes, deliverables that can be useful to journalists in other parts of the country. And also, very especially, the Thomas Scattergood Behavioral Health Foundation here in Philadelphia, Joe Pyle, who also we'll talk to in a few minutes. This is now the 3rd workshop the DART Center has put on in collaboration with Scattergood, which had the vision of creating a community of journalists here in Philadelphia who are knowledgeable and informed and connected around issues connected to mental health, behavioral health. Past workshops have included one on covering veterans, another on covering youth violence. This is a natural extension of that work, and we're very excited to do so. The DART Center, as most of you know, is devoted to improving journalism on violence, conflict, and tragedy, everything from family violence and street crime up to war and international human rights. We are based at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, do activity all around the U.S. as well as worldwide. We have offices in London and in Australia, which cover those regions. You today are actually part of an ongoing and growing conversation among news professionals worldwide about how to cover many of the most challenging issues on the news agenda with greater depth of knowledge, with new tools for storytelling, with new ways of thinking about news priorities and ethics. It's an exciting project, and I urge you, any of you, to be part of other programs and projects we have. There are a few folks here, a couple who have been DART Center Ochberg Fellows. That's a week-long seminar program. We have the DART Award, which recognizes outstanding journalism on violence and tragedy. Many other programs, all at www.dartcenter.org. Before I introduce our funders, I want to say a few things. And I'm going to start, well, first let me start with some housekeeping. First of all, this is open for tweeting, this conference. It is being videotaped and audio recorded. But it's also open for tweeting with the hashtag DARTConf, D-A-R-T-C-O-N-F, for any of you who are tweeters. We'll see what kind of a record that produces. For any of you who are either speakers or participants, if there's something you want to discuss that actually should be off the tape and not tweeted, that's fine. Just say so when you open your mouth, and we'll turn off the electronics, and everyone in the room will respect your privacy in that regard. Because we're being recorded, also when it comes time to ask questions, there'll be microphones passed around the room. Please use those so that your voice gets recorded in high-quality digital sound for posterity. We'll be taking breaks through the day. This is not an easy subject, question of suicide, and it'll be important to clear our heads from time to time. And at the same time, we have this kind of snake-canned agenda that we need to deal with. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the housekeeping. Let me now say a few things, and I'm going to begin with a confession. We at the Dart Center put on a lot of interesting workshops on a lot of subjects that other people than journalists would find off-putting. You know, I mentioned veterans and covering youth violence. We deal with crime. We deal with war. We deal with torture. We deal with the fallout of all of these issues. And I have to confess that despite our long experience doing conferences on difficult subjects, as we've been preparing this conference, today's workshop, in collaboration with our partners at Scattergood and AFSP, I found myself having a harder time with this topic than any other that we've covered, with the question of suicide. As a journalist, I found it harder. I found myself sometimes not wanting to focus on it. I found myself occasionally wondering, what, are we crazy? 2 days on suicide? Which probably some of your friends and partners and colleagues said when you said you were coming here. I do think that this subject is uniquely haunting and uniquely daunting for us as journalists. Haunting may be the conventional, the easy part to explain. You know, it's haunting if any of us in our lives have known someone who's died by suicide. It is haunting because many of us struggle within ourselves with issues like depression. It is haunting because we think of our own partners and children and parents and people we know. And because the impulse to take one's own life is so challenging to understand. That's why great artists, Shakespeare and the Greeks, dealt with this issue over and over and over again. It's a very challenging topic, and it requires, in some sense, the insight of the artist. And so it's haunting. But it is also daunting professionally, and that, I think, is as big a challenge as any. It is daunting because for us as journalists, first of all, so often the suicide of a promising young adult, an accomplished professional, defies our own understanding and defies our knowledge base. We don't know the science. We don't know the rules in some ways. It's despite the fact that all of our newsrooms, all of our careers sooner or later deal with these issues in big ways and small ways, it's not something we know a lot about. That's daunting. Overcoming big gaps in knowledge is daunting. It's daunting as well because of the ethical and moral dimension. What is our role as journalists when confronted with the suicide of individuals, when confronted with suicide as an issue, when confronted with the possibility that our reporting, our news choices will have an impact, whether it's on survivors, whether it's on prevention, whether it's on public policy? That's daunting, right? A daunting set of ethical challenges. And finally, it is daunting as craft. These are difficult stories to tell, whether it's about individuals or about policy. These are, how do you narrate the issue of suicide in a way that is accessible, that is informative, that is attractive enough that people will continue to read or listen or watch? I think that's why we're here today. And I think if we gain some control over this subject by looking at what is professionally daunting, we also will gain control a little bit over what is so challenging and haunting in the subject of suicide. We're also here because over the course of the past year, this has been a subject very present in the news. I know here in Philadelphia, and I look forward to hearing this from you, in the last couple of weeks, there have been some important stories involving murder-suicide and other issues. Some of you in this room, I'm sure, covered the Tyler Clementi case, not far away from here in New Jersey, which got such huge international attention. Just a few weeks ago, in July, the new figures for military suicide came out, and they were not encouraging. They were an all-time high. So the issue has entered the presidential campaign, a question of how to prevent suicide in our armed forces. Celebrity cases. Just a few weeks ago, the news was filled with a couple of different stories involving sports figures, involving entertainment figures. This story has been with us, this issue has been with us in a huge way over the last year, and yet as a profession, we've never had this kind of an organized conversation about it. Never asked the experts, what do we need to know? And never asked ourselves, how do we need to approach this issue differently? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What are some new strategies for going forward? Let me give you a little bit of a roadmap for the next 2 days. Okay. It's a very simple structure, the outcome of which is in some ways up to you. Today, we're going to primarily hear from experts, some of the top researchers and prevention advocates in the United States have come here today to work with you. And we'll hear from them and have a chance to talk with them, both beginning with a general overview from our keynote speaker, Mandy Gould, walking through victim experiences, survivor experiences, and then proceeding to some discussions later in the afternoon about special populations. So there's a general trajectory for today. And then tomorrow, as you can see in your agenda, the focus shifts to you, to a journalist-to-journalist conversation in which we take all the ideas and information and arguments, and there will be some arguments among the experts today because this is a contentious subject and we're not going to cover that up. How do we take all of that and translate it into good journalism? What are your experiences already with these issues? What are innovative approaches that you've used? What are the choices that we have to make? My colleague Ari Goldman from Columbia School of Journalism is going to lead us in a case study that will explore some of the ethical and craft dimensions of the story. So we'll end up having a journalist-to-journalist conversation. And then there's the part that's not on the agenda but is very important, 2 parts. First of all, there's networking in the room. I hope that all of you, A, develop the experts who are here as your own sources when you are working on your own stories later on, and B, to develop a community of colleagues who you can turn to hash things out as the stories you're working on come up. I should say that while this is a serious subject and a daunting one and a haunting one, I also find it full of possibility, and that's why we're here. It's full of rich possibility for us as professionals. when you think about our role as journalists, this is a huge public health crisis. Suicide is one of the highest, and we'll hear about this later. It's the second highest cause of death in young and middle-aged adults. This is an important public health issue that the public finds it very difficult at times to focus on. So we're here for a very important purpose, and our role as journalists is really threefold. We have the possibility here of educating the public, our news consumers, in new ways. We have the possibility of investigating whether our institutions of government and healthcare and education are doing all they can, are meeting best practice. And we have the ability to narrate in ways that are compelling, in ways that change news consumers' understanding and thinking and commitments on these important issues. And that is a very exciting prospect that should engage all of us. The fact that these stories call upon us to tell stories in new ways, to use new information, is a challenge, but it's also a way of reinventing journalism on an important public health issue. And that's what this meeting is about. I also want to say that we will have some very interesting conversations about the role of media generally and news professionals in particular that probably will continue outside of this room. Our friends at AFSP have guidelines, last year issued guidelines for suicide coverage after lengthy consultation with journalists, with public health experts and others. Those are in your packet and are worth looking at. They are the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And this workshop is the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of a conversation. I now want to introduce briefly two people to welcome you here, without whom this wouldn't have happened. Joe Pyle from Scattergood and Bob Gebbia from AFSP. Joe, I'd like to start with you. You are our host in this beautiful space here at WHYY. So if you would say a few things, and then Bob.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll be really quick here. I'm always inspired by Bruce's opening comments and how he sets up the 2 days. And I'm always amazed at the group that he brings together, both from a journalistic perspective and from a panel of experts perspective. So I'm excited for the 2 days and the learning that I will have. Most importantly, though, I really want to thank all of you, as Bruce said, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here to get it right. And I think that the Scattergood Foundation really struggles as a small organization to say, where can we put our dollars to the best use in terms of creating advocacy and decreasing stigma. And we really are looking at our investment in the journalism space as a key aspect of really raising that advocacy bar higher for people that suffer from mental health issues. So I want to thank you all for your interest and your work on getting it right. I'd ask that over the next couple of days and weeks, you go to our website and look at some of the things that we are doing around journalism and comment on it. Give us some feedback. There's plenty of places to respond and comment, and I'll make my email address available to folks to get feedback on. You know, Bruce said it really well that those of you who are from Philadelphia do know it well, that it's a city that's struggling with incredible violence issues. And in a night where, recently talking to some city officials, where we had 2 homicides, that same night we had 5 suicides. And I think that those stories go untold. And what creates that environment and creates those outcomes, I think needs to become more of a public discussion. So again, I think this is a very timely issue. So I don't want to take up a lot of time. I'm just glad you're all here to get it right. And I also want to thank HYY for providing this great space for us. They are a partner of ours as we fund a health reporter here. And that's the other question, is where in the changing evolution of journalism, where will philanthropy settle in as a supporter of the work that you all do. So we're struggling with that, and any feedback that we can get on that would be great as well. So I want to thank HYY and thank you all again. So Bob?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you, and this is something we had been envisioning for a long time, and it's really exciting to see it happen. And we're thrilled about partnering with DART and Scattergood in putting this on. We've had a long interest in this topic, going back over 10 years, and did work on those first guidelines, now redone as recommendations, and we hope that you'll look through those and utilize them as you see fit. And our foundation has grown in those 10 years too in many ways. And now we really are the leading organization for understanding and preventing suicide. And we do that through a lot of different ways. Investing in scientific research. Advocacy has become a key part in working on policy. But education and developing good prevention strategies and programs and testing them is a big part of our agenda. But educating the public is where we intersect. As journalists, you have a mission different than suicide prevention, but we do intersect in terms of helping the public understand something, informing the public, and doing it in an accurate and quality way. So that's where we intersect. So we're thrilled to be working with you, and I hope there's a great dialogue between the suicide prevention people in the room the next 2 days and you as journalists. Now, it wasn't too long ago where suicide was poorly understood. Maybe it's a little better today, and rarely talked about. And then it was a secret. Today I would echo what Bruce said. Today it's understood and recognized as a public health problem that we can do something about. And I think that's starting to change the conversation. And as you all know, there's a new focus on suicide. The Surgeon General just released a new national strategy just a little over a week ago. There's certainly growing interest in this across the country, in big communities, small communities, and nationally. There's something else that's changed, not only about changing the conversation from just focusing on the size of this problem or the extent of the problem, but to starting to talk about prevention, ways that this can be addressed. That's a really important sea change. And until recently, really, there wasn't much about that. If somebody wanted to die by suicide, the view was they're going to kill themselves. Nothing can be done to stop that or change that. We think that there is prevention. We need to start talking about that. So that's something I hope we'll pick up in the conversation over the next 2 days. But there's one other thing that's changing that I want to share with you quickly, and that is we are seeing people getting engaged in this problem in ways they have never done before, and in numbers we've never seen before. People who are personally touched by this, whether it's through a loss or whether it's through their own struggles or family members' struggles, are more likely now than ever before to talk about it, to open up about that. We see it in the involvement of constituents around the country. We do 270 Out of the Darkness walks. I think we've become more known for those than maybe our other programs, but we're going to have over 100,000 people walk this fall. And another 300,000 to 400,000 people support those walkers, opening up the conversation about how it's affected them. And I think that has real implications for your work as well. So we see some changes, and you are part of that change, and we're looking forward to working with you over the long haul to try to change the conversation about suicide in our country and to have a more informed public. I would just leave you with one other thought. We are a year-round resource. It's not just 2 days. And AFSP.org has a lot of information at your fingertips. Wiley Tenney, who's here, Wiley, raise your hand, is a good contact at AFSP, can put you in touch with experts on any aspect of this issue, can provide you with data, research studies to back things up. So we have a lot to offer, family members as well. So I hope you'll use us year-round as a resource as you work on this very, very challenging topic. So I thank you for being part of the program. Thank you. Bruce?
I think, let me just say this. I think that Bob and Joe have just laid out a very important challenge, almost thrown a glove down to us as journalists. And that's to think about death by suicide as a preventable death, to think about a public health issue. That is why we're here, and that's what engages us as journalists. It's not just telling the stories of whether or not to tell the story of a particular individual and what to put in an obituary. But it's really, what's our role as journalists when we're confronted with the possibility of saving lives, with communicating information that can save lives, with making news choices that can save lives?